Good evening, everyone. Councillors, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our agenda forum. We welcome back members of the public for the first time in several months as we start to ease out of the COVID restrictions, although in a modified format, so we welcome you all. Agenda forums are specifically for agenda items which are to be considered by Council at the next ordinary meeting of Council. Agenda forums are not decision-making forums. They provide an opportunity for councillors to be equally informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of such matters to the next council meeting for formal consideration and decision. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed. The recording will also be archived and made available on the city's website after the meeting. If you choose to participate in the meeting during public question time or deputation time, it is assumed that your consent is given for the audio to be recorded. Please keep your comments respectful to councillors and other members of the community. Visual images of the public will not be captured. Attendance and apologies, Mr. CEO. At this point, I have Councillor Scanlon, who is unwell. Are there any others?
Councillor Richardson is not present, Mr. Mayor.
Must be late.
So she might be late, running late.
Okay, if there are no others. Declarations of financial and proximity interest and interests affecting impartiality.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Kiley's expressed an impartiality in item 3.2, that's B 3.2, supposed single house at 170 Swan Street, and that is an executive of the Guildford Association who may have contributed to the comments made in their submission. Councillor Zanino has expressed an impartiality in items C 3.2, 3.3. They are in relation to lot 401 and lot 1056 Great Northern Highway. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Lucas has expressed the same, an impartiality in the same two items, C 3.2 and C 3.3, in that that the Ray and Denise Zanino, who are adjoining residents, are friends of his. Mr. Mayor, I haven't expressed financial interest in item C 3.1, the recruitment of the CEOs, Mr. Mayor, as I am the current CEO. Councillor, I think this is Councillor Petty Jones, Mr. Mayor, didn't write it in, has expressed an impartiality in item 1.2, the policy review leasing of community facilities, in that she has occasions hired the Woodlake Community Centre for non-for-profit dancers. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor staff, any further declarations of any kind? No. In that case, we move on to public question times and questions relating to reports on the agenda. And 5.1, a question from Ms. Pam Royden. Mr. Russell, do you have a response to Ms. Royden's question?
No. Come up to the other microphone, might be.
Can you hear that, Mr.
That's better.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was the query requesting or asking why the revised application was not re-advertised for public comment. The answer to that, Mr. Mayor, is that the revisions were considered by city staff to address the issues raised in the public submissions, to respond to those sufficient for us to place the item back and address that to council.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Questions 5.2, questions without notice. I have nil. Reports and motions for which previous notice has been given. Deputations. Now, councillors and members of the public are all advised that we are allowing 40 minutes in total for deputations and a maximum of 5 minutes per deputations, which will include where time is available for questions. So the first deputation, before we get to it, item 3.2 is the first, and we have written submissions from Mr. Steve Coleman, Ms. Nancy Sinclair, Ms. Leanne and Mr. Giuseppe Albertini, R.C. Johnson, Miss Eric Nottle, Miss Marg and Jeff Logue, Miss Kathy Fenner and Miss Nadine Saliba against the recommendation. The first deputation is from Mr. Patrick Irwin on behalf of the Guildford Association against the recommendation. Mr. Irwin.
It's good to see you all back here. And this matter, I think, is important because it's really, I think, one of the first items that's really come up which impinges or is involved in the Guildford heritage recognition of the town. It's a planning matter in that context, in the context of Guildford now under state registration as a heritage town, the only such town in Western Australia. And this matter is not simple, and the report that is in your agenda is 46 pages. The DA itself is 46 pages of supporting documentation, so there's quite a lot in this. I'll try and be quick. The basic point in planning that I think is important to emphasise is that planning is essentially about maintaining and preserving amenity of places. Now, Guildford has its own amenity, as we know, which is why it has that state registration. So I think that's a very important point. And this particular application, I think, it's a very attractive design. I think it's got a lot of merit. However, I think it is essentially an overdevelopment on a small constricted site, such that it is actually 3 stories high. It has a basement and 2 stories above that basement, making a total of 3 stories. The area, including the 110 square metres of the basement, is 417 square metres of house. That's a very big house. I can get a 3-bedroom house for a developer in 100 square metres. So this is a big house. It's a big house on a small block. As a result, it's gone up high, and as a result, it exceeds the R codes in 3 or 4 instances due to height. Now, I noticed on the summary at the beginning of the page of the officer's report, the last point says, City staff considered the modified proposal complies with the Guildford Conservation Guidelines and the Residential Design Codes of Western Australia. However, the same officer's report for the same design, with only the change to the front facade, which has no significance to what we're talking about in terms of the R codes, made clear points that the R codes are infringed. The deemed to comply aspects of the R codes are significantly exceeded, in height particularly, due to the overdevelopment on the site. Now, as you know, Guildford, the Guildford Policy 106 recommends restricting to 2 stories in Guildford generally, as is consistent with the townscape. Now, what we have here is the ridge height, which exceeds the R code normal limit, which is a limit you find all round Perth, which is 9 metres. The ridge height is something like 1,200 millimetres higher than that limit. The main concealed wall height exceeds the R codes. The concealed wall height being a wall concealing a roof, and the western face also exceeds the R code. So we have three instances, and this is well illustrated in the documentation which the architect has provided for you. It's illustrated where he shows what the permitted, that's these illustrations, he shows there what the permitted heights are for the different elements we're talking about and how much of the building sticks through above those. So it's quite clear.
You have 1 minute, Mr. Newman. You've got 1 minute.
The architect himself has made it quite clear for you, and the original officer's report made it quite clear. It exceeds the R codes. It does not maintain the amenity of the streetscape nor the neighbour's property. This looming, if you look, the first floor height of this proposal is virtually at the window head height of the first floor of the neighbour's property, 172. You can see that quite clearly on these illustrations also. There's a white band which is running around on the 172 Swan Street virtually at window head height, and that coincides pretty neatly with the first floor height of the proposals. So it's a story too high, and it's the ceiling heights within the proposal itself are of the order of 3 metres. The whole thing
Thank you,
could
Mr.
be
Irwin. That's your 5 minutes.
reduced.
Thank you very much. The next...
Okay, thank
No,
you.
I'm not going to cancel. We are on a strict time frame, and we made it very clear to all the speakers, including Mr. Irwin, that they had 5 minutes and should have presented in that time frame. So our next speaker on this item is Ms. Pamela Royden, speaking on behalf of the residents of Swan Street, Guildford. Ms. Royden, welcome. You too have 5 minutes.
Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak at this forum on this item, the development application for 170 Swan Street West. My name is Pam Reardon and I'm the next door neighbour at 172 Swan Street West and am representing the residents of the street. I object to option 1 and support option 2. This is not about whether we like or dislike the design of this house. We have policies to guide us in making planning decisions. Most of us won't be sitting here in 20 years' time. However, we're only transient, the building is permanent. So we need to consider the application from the point of view of the future of Guildford. We have policies so that emotion is removed from decision making and we can adhere to principles that have been developed for valid reasons. Guildford has now been placed in the State Register of Heritage Places. We have a Guildford Conservation Precinct policy. This is in addition to the residential design codes of WA. We promote Guildford as a tourist destination. The council spends a lot of money on restoration, such as the current one for the town hall. Then surely we want to encourage developments to support this theme. As the older homes are demolished, do we want them replaced with houses that bear no relation to heritage? The conservation policy states that new homes should fit in with streetscapes in scale, size and form. 16 out of the 18 residences in Swan Street West objected to the original development application. No one was notified of changes to the design. However, they now know of the changes and their opinion remains unaltered. Many residents expressed their experience of having to conform to the conservation policy in the past and now see a disregard for the same rules. The report lists many areas where the original design did not comply. I consider that the majority of these aspects still apply. The original design, which has been kept in principle regardless of adding a brick facade and another window, is flawed in that it makes no attempt to be empathetic to the existing houses on Swan Street West, particularly on the north side, which is where it is to be built. The changes do not make it comply and do not give it a strong resemblance to 172, nor does it in any way resemble other houses in Swan Street West. It does not support the heritage values of Guildford. As Patrick has mentioned, the heights do not comply in 3 areas of the R codes, the apex height of the roof and the 2 heights of the walls. And what about amenity? It's a term that will mean different things to different people. I understand that loss of view is not a planning consideration. To correct the report, it was not the setback from the boundary that was concerning us, the neighbours, but rather the protrusion of the 5 metre and 8 metre high walls towards the rear of the house, thereby providing us with expansive views of these walls from our living areas, the office, the bedroom and the deck. The dark container-like structure on the western side is foreboding and unfriendly. I encourage all of you to view the western elevation diagram. As the houses on the north side of Swan Street West back onto the floodplain and the river, a lot of their amenity is associated naturally with the areas at the rear of their properties. When 172 Swan Street was built, it was set back from 174, its neighbour, so as not to impinge on the neighbour's outlook and amenity. It is a shame that 170 has not afforded 172 the same consideration. As Patrick said, 170 Swan Street West has a total area of 417 square metres. We think we have a very large house at 267 square metres. If one needs such a large house, perhaps one should choose a more appropriate block on which to build it. In fact, option 2 of your recommendation states it all. And if the officers acknowledge that the points of option 2 to be valid,
1 minute, Ms. Royden.
How can option 1 be a viable alternative? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, Ms. Royden, you can stay there. Councillors, Ms. Royden finished 53 seconds earlier, so there's an opportunity for questions of Ms. Royden, if anyone has any. No?
Okay.
Yep. Councillor Kiley?
Pam, thanks for that deputation. Do you know where the air conditioning units or the like will be? Will they be abutting?
No, I don't know. I don't know that the house has got air conditioning.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Question put the owner later.
And you're saying your house is 267
7.
metres
Yep.
squared, right? And yours is quite a large house
Yes,
as it is.
it is.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next speaker on this item is Miss Christine Hogan on behalf of Transition Town Guildford and residents of Swan Street West, Guildford, against the recommendation. Welcome, Miss Hogan, and you have 5 minutes also.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr Christine Hogan. I am a resident of 174 Swan Street West and a development consultant. I am here tonight as a committee member representing Transition Town Guildford. We strongly object to option 1 and we strongly support option 2 to refuse the current application for the single house at 170 Swan Street. I'm also a resident of Guildford and I'm proud to say I've lived here for 26 years. Some say I'm a newcomer to this community. During my time in Guildford, I've acquired a great love for the people, the sense of community, the landscape, flora and fauna. We have a wonderful sense of place, a sense of belonging and a cohesive community spirit. As a resident and development consultant, I also strongly support option 2 in its current form. The officers of the City of Swan have clearly identified 3 important factors in support of option 2 to refuse the application on the grounds that it does not comply, number 1, with the requirements of local planning policy regarding its size, its scale, its form and its siting. Secondly, the proposed development is incompatible with surrounding development. Again, in the words of City of Swan staff, by virtue of size, scale, form and siting. Thirdly, and as Peter and Pam have commented, the proposed development will have an adverse visual impact on the character of Swan Street West and Mere Street and Guildford heritage. In addition, I would like to those 3 factors cited by the City of Swan for non-compliance. We wish to draw attention to the following items. First, appearance. The design of the proposed street frontage resembles a commercial property rather than a domestic dwelling in historic town Guildford. This impression is gained by the modernistic, asymmetrical appearance of the front windows and gable end wall of the front of the house, which extends the full height of the roof. This gives the property the appearance of a commercial building, or as some people say, the end wall of a church. Secondly, the dark grey, sinister, rectangular structures on the west side of the building appear separate from and contrasting to the brick facade, and strongly resemble 2 shipping containers stacked one on top of the other. That they stand above the roofline terminator and sloping roof emphasises their separateness and implies an industrial function. Already, planner Peter has commented on the height. Secondly, the modified design still exceeds the R codes in terms of wall height and is non-compliant. Thirdly, I would like to add that the issues submitted previously by Guildford residents have not been adequately taken into account in the revised submission. This is important. We're setting a precedent here in terms of historic town Guildford. We're sending messages. In conclusion, as a community, we are very pleased to see the City of Swan put time, money and expertise into the ongoing development of Guildford Precinct and love to see visitors and tourists exploring our streets in Guildford by foot and on bikes. In conclusion, the sustainability of historic towns depends on, firstly, the maintenance of existing buildings and treescapes, and secondly, the discerning development of new buildings in sync with a sense of place of both the built and natural environment. Thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to speak tonight on behalf of Transition Town Guildford and also as a long-term resident of Swan Street West.
Thank you, Ms Hogan. Your timing is impeccable.
Thank you.
Okay. Our final speakers are Mr Terry and Ms Helen Quaife in support of the recommendation. There's no time for questions, Councillor. I've already told you that.
Oh, Mr Mayor, I would like to ask questions, if that's all right. That's what agenda forums are for. So
What, sorry?
It's what agenda forums are for, to ask questions, Mr Mayor.
Well, I would remind you, Councillor, that we were informed yesterday of the structure of this meeting. That would be 5 minutes, including questions.
Mr Mayor, you informed
No, I'm not going to
us,
answer with
but
you, Councillor.
You don't have permission. You're not the decider here. So if you don't mind, I'll ask a question. Agenda forums are here for a purpose. And as you're well aware, the COVID-19 scenario has left Western Australia. So I'd like to ask a question, if it's all right with you.
Well, you
So
can ask
what I
Ms
would
Lloyd. No, Councillor, I'm not going to take your question. That's
Well,
the end of the issue.
Mr Mayor, I think you're disrupting the meeting. So if you don't mind,
No,
I'll
Councillor,
continue.
you are. And I have informed all councillors
Look,
how
Mr
this
Mayor,
meeting will run.
Councillor, I'd just like to move a
motion
motion that we allow questions of people delivering deputations.
I've already said, Councillor, we will allow questions where time permits.
Mr.
It's
Mayor,
very clear,
it's
and you
not
could have raised it with me
appropriate for
yesterday,
you-
and you chose not to.
No, Mr Mayor, it's not appropriate. It's not your decision.
Well, it is,
It's
it
been-
is as the presiding member to set the tone for the meeting and the structure of that meeting, and that was and clearly advised to
So,
presenters
Mr Mayor, can
and
you
councillors.
explain why you need to restrict the meeting time to 40 minutes?
Councillors, we still have another whole heap of other presenters and other whole heap of issues to go through for the Q&A prior to after this. The meeting was laid out, Councillor.
Mr Mayor,
all well informed.
Mr Mayor, with due respect,
if
you're
you-
simply wasting our time. I'd like to ask the question. And the question is this.
No,
Could
Councillor.
Mr Mayor, Mr
Councillor.
Mayor, please stop disrupting the meeting.
Councillor Johnson, one more ruling for you, and I will sanction you for the remainder of the meeting. That's my ruling, and I'm finished with it. No, Councillor Catalano, same goes for you.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move. Mr Mayor, I'm moving a motion. We're moving a
Well,
motion.
you've put your motion in. Come on, let's hear it. You
So the
want
motion is that we continue the meeting as we normally do, asking questions of people making deputations.
Well, councillors, you're all aware of the condition of this meeting. So Councillor Catalano is obviously going to second it. Councillor Henderson, are you with us? Hello, are you up to speed? What's happening here? Councillors, pay attention to the meeting. Councillor Johnson, you just want to do that again for Councillor Henderson's benefit? Okay. Those in favour of Councillor Johnson's motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion failed. Thank you, Ms Hogan.
Thank you.
Ms Quaife, if you'd like to come to the microphone, please. And you too have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. Helen and I are the proponents for the application, and we're speaking in support of the officer's recommendation to approve the development. Many of the objections submitted mention the neighbouring property. The property was built around 1993 in a mock colonial style and has no heritage value whatsoever. The proposed new home is similar in bulk, size, setback and height to the neighbouring property and many others in the street. The setbacks and development ratios are well within the requirements of the R codes, which indicates that overdevelopment is not an issue. The proposed home is narrower than the house next door and around 1 metre higher due to the 1 in 100 year flood level. Further, Table 3 in the R codes, to do with the maximum building height, also states that the height limit of 9 metres applies to roofs with a maximum pitch of 25 degrees, and that where a steeper pitch is required by the local policies, a greater height is permitted. The difference between 25 degrees and 35 degrees is 1 metre, which takes the maximum height in this case to 10 metres, before applying any discretion for flood levels. On the issue of views, the neighbouring property enjoys a full unobstructed view north towards the river from both downstairs and upstairs rooms and the balcony, which remains completely unaffected by the proposed new home. Furthermore, because our property cannot extend beyond the floodway, they will also keep their view to the northeast across the back of our property, which will remain untouched. It is unreasonable for this neighbour to expect to retain a sideways view across our property. With respect to the setbacks along the common boundary, many of the objections conveniently omit the fact that the property at 172 has a 5 metre high blank wall 1.5 metres from the shared boundary. The proposed home is also 1.5 metres from the boundary with a further 1 metre setback where the second storey starts. These setbacks required by the R codes allow light and air circulation between adjoining houses, and no one can reasonably expect any more in a residential setting. With respect to the conservation policy, many of the objections display a serious misunderstanding of the heritage conservation policy, especially those outlined by the Guildford Association. There is no heritage value in a new house, and most of the policy rightly deals with the details displayed on real heritage properties in Guildford. These must be preserved because they represent real heritage values. What the policy says about new houses is as follows: new buildings shall not try to look like heritage buildings. And then the marked distinction method involves using contemporary design and respecting the surrounding original building qualities, proportions, scale, and the like. Contemporary means of the time, and the time is the year 2020. Building qualities, proportions and scale are all about making sure that a massive house is not built on a normal block, which is absolutely not proposed in this case. With respect to the WA Heritage Council, they found as follows: the scale of the building is appropriate, with it being smaller than many of the large residences in that area of Guildford. And after the changes to the frontage were made, the proposed revision received on the 3rd of April demonstrates that the design has taken cues from the street in its material and colour palette. As part of our submission and at the request of the Guildford planners, we commissioned an independent heritage impact assessment which was prepared by Phil Griffiths, who, by the way, was one of the authors of the Guildford Heritage Policy. His report found there would be no impact on the Guildford heritage values.
Got 1 minute, Mr. Quaife.
And he concludes, in terms of respecting cultural heritage values, it's not a proper approach to imitate the past by replicating it. A calm contemporary approach is an appropriate response, which is evident in the current proposal for 170 Swan Street. Phil Griffiths, being a respected and awarded heritage architect, should know what he's talking about, but the Guildford Association spokesperson seems to think he knows much better. We stand by the conclusions of the independent assessment and reject the assertions of the Guildford Association in this matter. Given all of the above, we cannot see any legitimate reason for rejecting the officer's recommendation for approval, and we respectfully request that the council vote in favour of this application.
Sorry to interrupt. You've got a little bit of time left, but I know there's one question about air conditioners from Councillor Kiley. If you could address that in the remaining 20 seconds.
There is proposed to be an air conditioner, but the siting of it is undecided, and it can either go on the shared boundary or it can go on the other side. We don't mind.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that, Mr. Quaife. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is item 3.3.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a question of this gentleman?
We've already been down that path, Councillor, so no.
Mr. Mayor, the purpose of an agenda forum is to ask questions, and you did say earlier on that we could ask the proponent a question.
And if you recall, I said there was 5 minutes allowed for each deputation, which will include questions.
Mr. Mayor, the principle here is there's a 5-minute deputation, and then we ask questions.
No,
you're making it up as you go along.
No, that was clearly
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. You need to show some leadership here. Please do not disrupt the meeting. You've been asked before. I'd like to ask a question.
You have, no, Councillor, you have disrupted the meeting.
No, you have, Mr. Mayor. Please let me ask a question.
Councillor, I'm not doing it. I've made it very clear that you already had a motion that was defeated. End of story.
Mr. Mayor, it's not correct because earlier you said we could ask questions.
Go back and read the email of the structure of the meeting that you got yesterday, which I highlighted at the start of this meeting. Now, if you...
Mr. Mayor, you're simply wasting this entire council's time. Would you
Point of
please
order,
let me
point
ask
of
the
order,
question?
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Congdon.
Mr. Mayor, we had there was a motion put to council that was defeated.
It was defeated.
So can't you just rule this out of order and be done with it?
Well, I've instructed Councillor Johnson a number of times, and I've warned him that if he continues down this path, I will sanction him for the remainder of the meeting, Councillor. So you put the motion, it was defeated, end of story. So don't disrupt
Question,
the meeting
Mr. Mayor. What's the purpose of holding this agenda forum if we're not asking questions? That's the whole point of it.
You'll get the chance to ask the staff questions another day, later in
But
the meeting.
I'm not wanting to ask the
End
staff
of story,
questions.
Councillor. You are wasting time.
Mr. Mayor, stop. You're wasting the time. I want to ask this question. It's important. Remember, there's a camera on here and you're disrupting
I'm
the
very
meeting.
aware of that, Councillor.
Yes, so
Very
can
much
we
aware of
please
that.
ask the question?
And I don't need grandstanding in this chamber. You put a motion and it's been defeated. Interrupt me again and I will sanction you. I will not warn you one more time. It was in my power to do so and I will do it.
This is why you elected.
Yeah, it was. My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Those people giving deputations are now required to leave the chamber. Thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, are you leaving the chamber for good?
I'm coming back, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to ask my question.
Okay, Mr. Alan Posselt.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors and staff. My name is Diane Arvino. I'm the Secretary of
Ms Arvino, you're on the wrong one. Your item is next.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You told me to come up.
I was going to say you didn't look like an Alan. Okay, Mr. Alan Posselt on the construction of the rural shed parking commercial vehicles at number 70 Range Road, Millendon, speaking in support of the recommendation. And I would ask you can keep it brief if we can have a bit of time for questions. So just turn your microphone back on. That's it?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've just considering this project at 70 Range Road in Millendon. I'm happy with the way the city have handled it with Blake Eldridge dealing with some of the objections and so forth. There's a couple of matters that most probably need to be cleared up with regard to the neighbours. I've had some discussions with them as well. They seem to be of the opinion that I was going to run a business there, but I can assure you that I have no intention of doing that. I'm retired, I'm 75, and I don't think that they understood that because there's been a bit of activity there with regard to the renovation I've done on the house, and that over the last couple of years there's been a bit of conflict on what they thought I was going to do in the future. I've got no plans to run a business. We want to retire there, or that's the plan. And I have kept a couple of vintage pieces that I like to restore. I do a bit of restoring, and I want a shed to put my gear in. I've got a few bits and pieces, and just be able to lock it in a shed so I can maybe have a holiday and know it'll be there when I come home. So I've had a meeting with some of my neighbours. There's a guy on the north boundary doesn't actually join me, but there's a easement between him and me. But I had considerable discussion with him, but he's convinced that I'm going to, run this business and be doing maintenance at night and keeping him awake. He doesn't live there. He lives at City Beach, but he told me that one day he might live there, and he doesn't want to be disturbed. Things like this, I don't think was appropriate. And my other neighbours that I've discussed with in recent times. I think they're happy with what they've been told, and they consider it, the proposal not being objective to it. So, is there any questions? I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Posselt. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you for your deputation. One of the issues was the size of the shed, and on the northern side, you're going to be planting some further screening, I believe.
Yes, yeah.
And do you have water available to reticulate that and keep it going?
Oh yes, I've got 2 bores on the place.
Great.
And also I'm coupled to the scheme, but two good bores. So
thank you.
There's not a plan, no problem with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No other questions, councillors? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Posselt. Okay. Now, Ms. Arvino, it is your turn, and you're speaking on the heritage assessment for the Darling Range Hotel.
Yes. Good evening,
You
Mayor.
too have 5 minutes, but if you want some questions, well, we can shorten it up a little bit.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor,
Thank you.
councillors and staff. I'm speaking on behalf of the Bellevue Residents and Ratepayers Association in support of Councillor Johnson's motion for a new heritage assessment of the Darling Range Hotel. In 2017, the City Heritage Inventory Review saw the Darling Range Hotel entered at Level 3, losing by 1 vote the Level 2 entry, which would have protected this building from demolition in the future. The Heritage Assessment then recommended conservation of building desirable, but the officer's report concluded that the building should be in better condition for entry on Level 2. Today, the officer's report states that given the renovations that have taken place, another heritage assessment is appropriate and can be included with the 10 properties in Midland approved for assessment at the June 3rd meeting. The Darling Range Hotel has high social significance, which the community made very clear in 2017, with 1,500 people protesting on the Save the Darling Range Hotel Facebook page, many petitions and submissions to the City of Swan and to the Joint Development Assessment Panel, which resulted in 3 JDAP hearings. 2 rejected the DA to demolish the hotel, and the last approving a development application which retained the hotel. The social significance encompasses the significant architect E.E. Giles and the hotel's continued use over the now 115 years, which includes the important historical Anzac connection. The protection of this building, recognising it as important local heritage and leaving a footprint for future generations, is vital. So we urge the City of Swan councillors to support the motion of a new heritage assessment of the Darling Range Hotel and hopefully a future elevation to Level 2 on the city's heritage list. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arvino. Councillors, there's a couple of minutes for Ms. Arvino if anyone's got any questions. No? Thank you, Ms. Arvino.
Thanks very much.
Okay, and now ask members of the public to leave the gallery. And we now go to confidential deputations. Is he out there somewhere? He can't be too far away. All right, we'll move on anyway. So, first up is Executive Manager Planning, Development and Statutory Planning to deal with items 13.8, 2.1, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4. So, Mr Tan and Mr Russell, is there any of those items you wish to specifically address to Council?
No, Mr Mayor, all the stuff is in the report. I'm here to answer questions for 13.8 and 2.1.
Okay, any questions of Mr Tan? Yep, Councillor Catalano.
Oh yes, thank you. So with the design review panel, I'm just curious to know why we left off the. I'm just referring to the design review guide that the state government produces, DR4, no doubt you've seen it, which are the model terms of reference for design review panels. And I was just wondering, why did we leave off the proposals for group dwellings on 3.1?
dwelling is in there.
Yeah, at 3.1, you know 3.1 of the design review panel, that of the policy statement, 3.1. Why don't we have proposals of group dwellings as outlined in the text model terms here?
Definition of group dwelling. Definition of group dwelling is one independent unit, more than one unit grouped together, right? Generally, they are single story or two story. Two story are townhouses. Like I explained in page 23 and page 22, 23, all the rationale why we did not include. Group dwelling are fairly standard development. Most of the group dwelling lodged with the city are two-story townhouses, which does not require a specific referral to the design review panel, as in the template from the guide. If you look at page 23, third paragraph, right? The somewhere in the second last sentence, it says the design review panel guide model terms of reference recommending 3-story or over, to include, right, if explained in page 22, right, if you start including all group dwellings into refer to the design review panel, it's going to be a significant number of application and significant cost to the applicant. If you look at on 1, 2, 3, the third paragraph from the bottom of page 23, it says, right, the review taken by the city on group dwellings application, 2-story group dwelling application over 2018 and 2019, is talking about the cost. The cost, right, average cost for applicant is about $1,300. If you refer this to the design review panel, they will add another $5,100 to the application fee for a simple 2-story group dwelling development. That's not the intent of a design review panel looking at our standard townhouses 2-story development. If you look at all the development, some of the development in the new area like Ellenbrook, right, they have 2-story townhouses which do not require design review panel to review the design, because they're quite standard design for a 2-story. It's mainly, right, in terms of time and cost to the applicant and to the staff.
Okay. Thanks for that. But the design principles apply. I mean, it's not just about, whether it's going to cost a developer money, but don't the whole motivation for these panels, they're about assessing other things such as the context and character, landscape quality, built form and scale, functionality and build quality, sustainability, amenity, legibility and safety. And, the state government has recommended that group dwellings are actually included and are assessed for those under those criteria. That's part of the good design. I mean, this comes straight off the State Planning, Department of Planning's website. It forms part of their the reasons why they've asked councils to actually set about implementing these panels. So I think that shouldn't we be conforming to these objectives of planning?
Ms. Mayor, I haven't got that copy with me. I'll take that on notice. I'll provide a written comment to all the council before next week.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. Further question, Councillor?
Can I Just say then, I've just put on notice that I'll be making it
Alternate recommendation.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my question really relates to, it appears that the impost on the two-storey developer is just an additional $5,100. Is that correct, Mr. Tan?
Mr. Tan?
Mr. Mayor, the fee required for any application to be referred to the design review panel is $1,500.
Okay, yeah. So, in the case of a two-storey, is it grouped dwelling or two-storey development that needs to come to a design panel, surely the cost of that development is significantly greater than $5,000. Is a $5,000 additional cost really going to deter them from sort of developing?
Mr. Mayor, if you look at page 23, right, it's explained in there, the third paragraph down, it says, two-story group dwellings are relatively simple in the design and do not require a referral to the DRP. And on top of that, right, the cost involved, we did a survey like I explained in that paragraph. The general for a normal two-story building, depending on the cost of development, is average around $1,300. If you want to refer a mums and dads application for two group dwellings, two-story building, to the DRP, they have to pay extra $5,100 to do that, in addition to their planning fee. When it's a simple application, we look at the design, we look at the setback, it complies with the code. It's ticked off by staff. When staff assess it, right, they have to go through our codes, the setbacks, and everything.
I guess a question that needs to be put along those lines is, looking around Midland, it appears to be the two-storey mum and dad unit developments on these small blocks that are the ones that are in the need of having better designs, because many of them are not brilliantly designed at the moment. Would it not be likely to lead to better quality buildings in Midland, in particular, because that's where the problem is, if we put $5,000 worth of design review into each one of them, so that the mums and dads who can't afford an architect got the benefit of an architect?
Are you referring to a single dwelling, three-story single dwelling?
I think this applies to multiple units, doesn't it?
You can have a single, you can have a multiple dwelling, even a two-story multiple dwelling. A multiple dwelling is defined a self-contained unit, one above another. That's multiple dwelling. A group dwelling, right? Townhouses, you have a single unit with upper floor and lower floor within a same building. So any multiple dwelling, whether it's two-story, three-story, we are obliged under this policy to refer to the DRP.
Further questions, Mr. Tan? Thank you, Mr. Tan. Mr. Russell? Anything specific you wish to talk to? You're opening for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have anything necessarily to add to what's in the
Okay. Councillor Kiley, which item?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Russell, it relates to item 3.2. There was a deputation tonight in regard to the previous deemed to comply provisions of the R codes in regards to ridge height. They were suggesting that when you previously did not approve, the ridge height hadn't changed. The ridge height was non-compliant in the previous recommendation, but now it does comply. Is that correct? I'm just trying to work out what's occurred there.
Through Mr. Mayor, No, I'll be clear. And look, there is maybe some understandable confusion, and I think Mr. Aaron got it very correct when he's saying it's a complex proposal and a complex suite of instruments. The applicant or the owner was quite correct in the statements around the provisions of the ridge height under the R codes, which is the acceptable development provisions, and they can be varied. I think what is necessary to understand, and what we've endeavoured to articulate in the report, is that the Guildford Conservation Precinct Policy Design Guidelines, acceptable development provisions for many elements, including height, supersede the R codes. If you're applying the R codes and saying this has to comply, it's incorrect, because that is not the instrument of priority. The instrument of priority is the Guildford Conservation Precinct Design Guidelines, and has been since year dot that they were implemented. And the owner was very correct in pointing that out. It's important to remember that. Now, even if that weren't the case, the mere fact that you don't meet the acceptable development provisions, as I've endeavoured to explain in the past, does not mean that you do not comply with the R codes or the conservation policy. All policies that we have, and it's exactly the same with the design review panel and the apartment guidelines of the R codes. There is, you tick this box, if you comply. If you vary that, and those are always quantitative measures, if you vary that, you are being assessed against the performance principles, and that's the same with all instruments you'll see in the planning system in this state, whether it's the R codes, our own Guildford Conservation Precinct Policy Design Guidelines, the apartment design guidelines that are applied to multiple dwellings, and that the design review panel has. There is a tick box quantitative measure that is unarguable, and then there is the more complicated and perhaps potentially subjective performance measures, where when we're talking about height here in Guildford, we're talking about whether it's consistent with the streetscape, development in its context, reference to other houses, the house next door, etc. That's the thing we've got to remember, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Russell, I'm interested to know what you think of the actual design of the building. I mean, the comment that keeps coming through from the community is the structure on the left, as compared with the brick structure to the right. What do you think of that? Because the left part, or the western part, is so different to the eastern part of the building, at least externally.
Through Mr. Mayor, if I understand Councillor Johnson's question, you're talking about what was referred as I think one lady referred to it as the sinister metallic attachment to the side of the building. Is that what you're referring to, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Russell.
I think there were comments along those lines. Well, look, I think what we all well appreciate here is it's often the case of beauty is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to the visual appearance of things. My own view, and I explained this to the architects and, in fact, the owners previously, I said, I wonder whether the computer-generated images that they have supplied does the proponent justice in terms of the darkness of some of the stuff. I completely agree that it appears quite dark and distinct from the brick facade. I wouldn't use the term sinister. I wouldn't use that. No, it's not my view at all. I think the important thing is we've endeavoured to show in the report that darker material, a contrast in materials and darker material can coexist reasonably with a predominant palette of stuff that is in context with Guildford. And certainly, going back to the original proposal, I would say, as I've said in the report, and I concur obviously with the Heritage Council, they said a grey blank wall, two-storey to the front of the street with this other dark stuff. There's not enough common palette here respecting of the other materials of predominantly of the buildings in the street and the rest of Guildford. The moment you change the palette to add the face brick to be the predominant material presentation of Swan Street, consistent with that of its neighbour at 172, in my opinion, was the game changer. And I don't profess to be an aesthetic or architectural expert, but I've been around long enough to know, going back to the point I was making, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I will say that it's got the tick of the predominant expert agency that adjudicates on heritage in Guildford, the town that we, as a local authority, in support of our community, raised and promoted for elevation to the state register. And as we know, when it comes to the final word on whether a proposal is consistent with the heritage values of this town on the state register, Mr Mayor, the final word must always be, because I can't see how it could be otherwise, what that agency has said. And for what it's worth, I concur with that agency, and that agency has got the same views that we've presented in the report.
Mr Mayor, just on that point...
Have you got a question?
I've got to make a point. We have had confirmed from the Heritage Council that we are the final authorised authority to make approval, not the Heritage Council. They are not the overriding authority on heritage or retention of Guildford's conservation. It lies within this council. I've said this before in this chamber. It's not with the Heritage Council. It is this chamber that has to make that decision.
We can do it. Okay. Any further questions of Mr Russell?
Yes.
There was a bit of date. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Mr Russell, the building on Lot 1 appears on page 130 to be, in fact, a little bit further away from Swan Street than the building on Lot 2 and even against Lot 3. I thought I heard this evening in deputations that someone said that it was further the other way, and I'm a bit confused about whether the deputation was wrong or whether the placement of the building on the drawing on page 130 is wrong.
Sorry, if I could ask through you, Mr Mayor, perhaps if I'm just trying to compose in my mind Councillor Henderson's question. So we're talking about the position, the siting of
the building,
the proposed house on what we call Lot 1, their house.
Yep.
With respect to the siting of the house next door at Lot 2
and 3.
And 3. The question being, if I could have it again, please, Mr Mayor.
Well, it appeared as though there was deputation saying that it was the other way around, that it was closer to Swan Street than the other buildings, and I think this says otherwise. Do you think the deputation was wrong?
The deputation being the owner that spoke last, or was it Miss Hogan, or the other neighbour that spoke, was it Miss Riordan that spoke with respect to the views looking out the back and the siting? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Miss Hogan was the last speaker. Yeah.
So were they talking about the back of the building or the front of the building? I thought they were talking about the front of the building. As
I comprehended all what was being said, Mr Mayor, I think they were suggesting that their problem with the house in question being proposed is that it ought to be forward on the site more to not impose or impact on views of the house next door. That's how I took it. Now,
is that what they were saying?
That's how I understood it, Mr Mayor. Now, the issue with all of that, of course, is if you push the house forward, you start to impact on an important element of the streetscape, which is the position of the house, the front building line to the street. If you had a house that was pushed right forward so that the people either side of it didn't look at the side of the house looking out towards the river, you're going to require this house to be far forward of all its neighbours, and then you start to introduce discordant or variations to the prevailing setbacks in the street, which is an important element of our policy.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Russell, my question goes again to the different nature of the structure to the west. And when I look at the plan, so if councillors want to take a look at page 114, it seems that the part of the building to the left, which has a different, if you like, shape and form to the brick part of the building to the right, functionally, it's completely integrated internally. So although it looks different on the outside, inside, it's just another part of the house. I mean, did the proponents explain why they chose to do that? I did ask them, by the way.
Through Mr Mayor, I didn't go into that detail to have them explain to me their inclinations to the design of their house, but I've watched enough grand designs to understand that people have particular aesthetic inclinations to how they like to build their house and how they like to present it. So I don't have an answer to that, Mr Mayor, but I'm sure everything that Councillor Johnson has said is correct. It is integrated in. I think from what I've understand of the owner is that they've made a deliberate choice, and they did emphasise this, to have a house that is not replicating an old house, but is of its time with modern materials that still has sufficient nod to the character of the area, and that's their inclination. They've had bits and pieces of grey charcoal brick and other things. I suppose that's their aesthetic palette and getting the balance between what they want and how they think it presents as a modern house.
Councillor Coley.
If we're finished on that item, I've just got a question about another one, Mayor. It relates to statutory planning decisions under delegated authority. Mr Russell, going through the list there, we had a presentation previously on retaining walls and our involvement in approving retaining walls, and one that collapsed but in Ellenbrook was one that was discussed. We've got 5 instances of retaining walls being approved under delegated authority. What's the situation? Are we're now approving, giving approval for retaining walls, or is that? I just want some explanation around that.
Through Mr Mayor, well, there's a couple of things we've got to remember. There is the planning requirement where it's not exempt to obtain planning approval for retaining walls, but there's also, and critically, the important building side. Retaining walls require building permits. So if we're talking about issues, as is in the instance you're referring to with Ellenbrook, we're talking about issues of has it been built structurally sound in accordance with building permits. So there's 2 different issues there. The planning approvals aren't intersecting with the structural integrity of the building permits.
And given that, you're saying they're not intersecting, how can we be sure that the approvals under delegated authority have the appropriate engineering provisions in them to ensure that they don't collapse?
Through Mr Mayor, because the proponents that get their planning approvals have to submit a building permit with all that certification at building stage.
Any other questions, Mr Russell? Okay, thank you, Mr Russell. Okay, now move on to Executive Manager of Operations, Mr Coaten. You've only got the one item there.
In the interest of time, Mr Mayor, I might just stay here if that's all right. The only point I'd just like to make is the leasing of community facilities policy. So it's important to note that this is different to leasing of commercial properties, which is a different policy. So that's the one that where council buildings are leased out specifically for investment purposes. It's also a different situation to what's the majority of our uses of buildings are a normal booking system, so people will either have a regular booking, they might make a casual booking for a particular facility. So this particular case, the leasing and licensing of community facilities relates to the situation where groups generally need exclusive use of a facility and they provide a net community benefit. So you know, your scouts groups, people like that have youth centres that can't share the building with anybody else, so it just applies to those specific groups. It's only a relatively small number of the buildings that that people use, that different groups use. The report itself is fairly straightforward, I think.
Okay. Any questions, Mr Coaten? Councillor Calano.
Is that going to cover like a lot of the leases that we've currently got? Sorry, leases, isn't it? It's
leases and licences. So
so these are the ones. Is that going to sort of rationalise what's currently in place, or are you anticipating that there'll be more in the future?
We're not anticipating, or there may be some more, there may be less. This isn't a new policy, it's been in place for a number of years and it just gets reviewed every 2 years, so it's being presented to Council as part of that review process.
Oh, okay, but that was to include leases though, wasn't it, this time round?
It includes leases and licences, yeah. The title has been amended, but it includes the community leasing and licensing of buildings.
Oh, right, okay, all right.
Okay. No more further questions, Mr. Caton. Councillor Henderson.
Jim, just to be clear, in respect to the buildings that we own, that we lease, is there a consideration that we will insure those properties rather than try and pass that on to people that lease them?
Yeah, as what we're trying to do with this, and some of our leases and licences that we've got have been in place for many, many years and were set up before this policy was in place, but what we endeavour to do is to have all those costs paid by the city, and then for a variety of reasons. One, because that way we're guaranteed that we know the insurance has been paid, it's through our insurer, etc. So that is generally the intention, that we pay the city, and then through the charge to the group that is reimbursed depending on the net community benefit that they pay.
Okay. No other questions? Thanks, councillors. Okay. Executive Manager Community Wellbeing, Mr. Bishop, with the picking up deceased animals.
Mr. Mayor, again, in the interest of time, there's only one item there. I have nothing further to add other than the report, but happy to take questions.
No questions? Okay. Thanks, Mr. Bishop. Ms. Lay, Manager of Governance and Strategy. No, sorry. Ms. Albright, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to take any questions. The briefing was last week.
Okay. No questions, Ms. Albright? Okay, and that takes us down to Ms. Lay, Executive Manager, Stakeholder Relations.
Mr. Mayor, I don't have any presentations. The briefing on the budget was last week. Happy to take any questions.
Quick questions, councillors. Councillor Catalano.
Yeah, thanks. I noticed that the budget that we got presented to us last week was actually considerably different to the one that we were presented on the 28th of April. To the effect, I think, that another $37 million worth of capital expenditure had been added to the capital expenditure list. So I was just wondering why we didn't get a copy of that list earlier, so that, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the version that councillors are presented in April is new budgeted figures. They then have the annual process where the carry forward budgets are put in as well, and that is what's presented to you in June. So this is a standard process each year to account for the carry forward budgets coming in.
Sorry, can you just explain a little bit more about carry forward? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mr. Mayor, the carry forward process looks at the projects that are on the current financial year's budget. Due to such things as delays in timing, issues with contractors, external influences, some projects can be delayed and aren't completed in that financial year that they're budgeted for. So unspent funds need to be carried forward to the next year to allow that project to continue to be delivered.
Okay. So when we did the motion in relation to the COVID response and the stimulus package, I thought there was I think it was number 2 or 3 about projects carried forward from 2019-20 would come out of reserves.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, I believe Councillor Catalano is referring to the stimulus package, and it was bringing to account that $8.85 million in the 19-20 financial year and how that would be resourced from a reserve. And then it was, we need to now account for that to be brought forward into the following financial year.
But, okay, so, sorry, so that's going to go from reserves
The stimulus package majority was funded from the plant and equipment reserve.
But that didn't relate to stimulus package.
Yes, it did, Mr Mayor.
That was the stimulus. So you're talking about the $8 million.
Yeah.
So how come the stimulus package items then have come out of municipal?
Because, Mr Mayor, when they were brought to account in this current financial year following Council's resolution in April, the money was transferred from the plant and equipment reserve into municipal to secure those funds out of the reserve and account for that transfer, and now they are carried forward.
I'm sorry, I don't really understand that. So the FAT's plant and equipment, but the
Basically, can I
yeah, go on, have a go.
Reserve fund, which is for plant and equipment, we can and we're allowed to by the Minister to take it out of there and use it for other purposes as a one-off as part of COVID-19. So you have to take it out of that reserve fund because normally you can't do that, you can only spend it on plant and equipment. The Minister allowed us to bring it out of there to spend it on other things. So therefore it had to come out of there and go into municipal fund. Once it's in municipal fund, then we can spend it.
Okay, all right. So when it comes to actual plant and equipment,
yes,
that's still coming out of the reserve fund.
Correct.
And what's the difference? Can you just sort of explain to me why there'd be that difference?
Well,
why would it be coming out of reserve fund for the plant and equipment, but the stimulus package has got to come out of there and put into the municipal? I just don't quite understand why it's like that.
Ms Lay.
Mr Mayor, as part of the COVID provisions that the Minister allowed local governments to do, and which was the resolution of Council in April, we had to find money to fund this additional expenditure that Council was approving to bring forward in all of its budgets. So this was future years' work. Council made a decision, let's bring it forward and let's stimulate the economy. Next question, how are we going to fund that? So we looked what reserves had balances where we could fund that $8.85 million, and that was taken from the plant and equipment reserve.
I understand. So basically we were given permission in this instance to take the money from the reserve and put it into the municipal fund.
Yep.
I got you. That's exactly that. Now I understand. So with, for instance, the this particular road here, which is Workshop Avenue, so 5.1 million. When was what budget did that belong in? You know, is that what 2019-20 or is it which one was that?
Mr Mayor, that was a budget adjustment, I believe, last council meeting or the one before, which saw a contribution from Main Roads allocated to fund Workshops Avenue.
And that's gone into the municipal fund?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Oh, okay. Main Road has gone to the municipal. Okay, great, thanks. So effectively, the operating expenditure or that as we got it on the 28th of April, that's basically still exactly the same. Is that what you're saying? And or has there been anything added to it that isn't a carry forward, I suppose, is what I'm asking?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the main adjustments that happen in operating is if we see additional grants that come into play. We're still doing the rates modelling work as well. Then we also run the internal service reallocation. So that sees different amounts in the operating statement shuffle across different programs.
Oh, okay. So that there may be some things that have gone
There
across.
will be some changes, but the biggest impact was the carry forward in the capital.
Okay, yep, okay then. So in terms of the figure of 12 million, which needed to be saved from the capital expenditure list to keep the rates at last year's rate in the dollar, that still basically refers to savings made from the budget that we were given with those capital works that are itemised in the budget on the 28th of April, or can actually savings now be made from the carry forwards?
Mr Mayor, there needs to be adjustments for the carry forward. It's really looking at the net effect of what is in the municipal fund for the 2021 budget that we need to balance out.
So, in fact, some of the carry forward can be, if a project hasn't started, that in fact that can be that fund can be not used. We can put that forward to next year, that particular project.
Mr Mayor, if particular projects haven't commenced, then it is Council's decision-making power to not progress those projects, but it is wise to understand any impacts and discuss that with staff.
Okay, yes, definitely, for sure. Okay.
Okay, can we move on, Councillor, because we're running just a short of time and a couple of other councillors like to have a question. So, Councillor Catalani, if you've got more, perhaps you could
I
touch
think
base
these
with
are
Tim tomorrow.
important for explaining to everybody
I do,
what's
but
going on in the
Councillor
budget.
Kiley's been desperately waiting to ask a question, Councillor Johnson as well. So,
go with me. So I've just got a couple of other ones. I just wondered, I've noticed there's been an increase in the cost for Brockman House, and is that a carry forward? Like there's this extra 500,000. Was that part of a carry forward or?
Mr Mayor, it was the carry forward.
Carry forward. Okay, all right, that's those. And the computing ISV. Council implementation, 1.9 million, that's carried forward, is it?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Thank you for that. Okay. And has that work started with the computing?
Yes, that's the Technology One project.
Technology One, okay, thank you. And, okay, that'll do for now. Thank you. Thanks for that. Cheers. Thank you.
is there anything left, Councillor Coley?
Yeah, just a quick one. Guildford Conservation Precinct Policy and Design. We've paid Element Advisory Proprietary Limited $22,789. Is that, they haven't done the work as yet. Is that a prepayment or have they done work? And how much are we paying Element in total for the work that they'll be doing?
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, if I can just clarify, which report are you referring to?
The
list of accounts paid?
100 accounts paid, yes. It relates to Element.
Mr Mayor, I would need to check the financial system to actually confirm that particular one for you.
Does anybody on staff know how much the contract is worth that we're paying Element all up? Roughly?
I understand they're doing a presentation to Council in coming weeks.
Haven't we got a presentation coming up, Mr Tan? Briefing? Eh? Just had one?
That must the one that we're doing in the design policy thing on the Guildford.
Oh, right. So we had the presentation about a month ago. So that would be the account
up to then, yeah.
And they still come to council yet.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson, bearing in mind in time, I'll make yours the last one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. My questions really relate to the relationship between the Capital Works programme and the rate setting statement and the comprehensive income by programme. If we turn to page 99, the total Capital Works programme is now listed at 157 million. And in the document that we got previously, it was 120 million. Now, I understand that's as a result of carry forwards. The question is, how does that reflect or get shown in the rate setting statement or the statement of comprehensive income? Wouldn't there be a $37 million change? I'm say looking at page 89 or... I'm looking at page 99 for the Capital Works programme and then say comprehensive income is on page 89. With maybe the rate setting statement we need to talk to you. I want to know where, the question is, where does that $37 million get reflected in the high level accounts? Because I can't work it out.
Mr Mayor, if I can just refer to Adnana.
Adnana.
All capital work is actually in the income statement represented in two lines. Other than gifted assets, it's a purchase of infrastructure, and the second one should be purchase of the buildings. So just a second.
Sorry, Mel. None, you got a page number there?
No.
Looking the wrong.
Page.
What page you've got with?
92. No.
Just a second. So on each statement that's presented in the budget book, there are two lines which are specifically allocation of the total capital expenditure. It's inclusive of the capital expenditure that's new for 2021 and carry forwards as well. On the top of that, there are specific lines for the in-kind assets. So just if we can...
If we,
I would like
Mr.
to,
Mayor.
but I don't have the iPad.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, if we can refer to the rate setting statement, which in the hard copy agenda
There's
is page
financials.
92.
92.
We have the, under capital works, we have the purchase of infrastructure assets.
So in the rate setting statement, we just got the page. You've got two lines. One is purchase construction of infrastructure assets, and the other one is purchase/construction of other capital assets. These two lines, combined with in-kind developers' contributions, is the total of the overall capital program that you can see listed to detail on that list for capital.
So I guess
and
the
you will
question,
find it across all financial statements.
the following question is then that 108,000 and that 30, so 108 million and that 30 million, shouldn't that add up to 157 million? But it doesn't, does it?
Plus the gifted in-kind.
Gifted assets,
Plus
land
gifted
ceded to the Crown as well. So different components, but yes, it does.
Okay. So how is it that the budget has not increased by a great deal, yet the we have increased it by 37 million as a result of the carry forwards? That's the bit that I don't get.
If I can answer this, the carry forward is actually $42 million. So that's the total which I have indicated last time when we had briefing session. That's the amount that's being carried forward. Take into consideration that we've got about $8.8 million stimulus package. Most of that is carried forward. We've got some big projects like this $5 million that only arrived to us around June. So that's a full amount carried forward. Some big capital projects are carried forward. The question that Councillor Catalano previously had about how that actually reflects from current year to a new year, it actually comes with its own cash. Therefore, the transfer from 1920 to 2021, although it increases significantly the capital program, it actually also brings across the same amount of cash that is spread across different accounts, down to reserves, loan funding, or grants received in prior year and becoming a cash. Therefore, the new year does not suffer any cost. It just increases. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you very much, Adnana. That is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Look, we have gone well over our recommended time, so I just want to quickly run through items to be withdrawn. Councillor Catalano, I have you with 13.8 for an alternative recommendation. 2.1, 3.1, so 3.1.
3.2.
So 3.1 or 3.2?
3.2.
3.3, 3.4, 1.2, 4.1, 1.1, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4. We already have 2. If there's any others. And last but not least are the 2 confidential items, C3.2 and C3.3.
Minor change to C3.1, but I might be able to get staff to just correct it.
3.1?
C3.1.
Oh, the CEOs? Okay, so, and a minor amendment. Okay. Right. Would you did work it out the staff? It'd probably be GS amendment. Okay, councillors, thank you all for your attendance and drive safely home.